In 2021, a data scientist sat down and, for $18,000, created 4 million people. They had names, birthdays, email addresses, and not one of them was real. Weeks later, America's largest bank paid $175 million for those 4 million people. This is the story of how a 29-year-old Forbes cover star sold JPMorgan a customer list that existed only inside a spreadsheet and got caught by the single dumbest mistake a fraudster can make. To understand why the world's most sophisticated bankers fell into this trap, you have to understand the myth Charlie Javice manufactured. Javice was the perfect prototype of a modern tech visionary. A brilliant graduate of the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, she possessed a rare gift. She knew exactly how to weaponize the language of Silicon Valley empathy. In 2017, she founded a startup called Frank. Frank's mission statement was utterly irresistible. In the United States, every student seeking financial aid must fill out a government form called the FAFSA. It is a notorious bureaucratic nightmare, a chaotic labyrinth of tax data, family asset declarations, and confusing legal jargon. Millions of low-income students abandon it every year, walking away from billions in unclaimed aid. Charlie Javice stepped into the spotlight and promised a revolution. She claimed Frank could turn hours of bureaucratic torture into a clean, digital, Amazon one-click experience. The media fell in love. By 2019, Forbes crowned her one of the brightest young minds in business. She was the golden girl of financial technology. But away from the cameras, the reality was bleak. Frank was burning through venture capital. It had no sustainable revenue model, and it was locked in legal friction with the Department of Education over misleading branding. Frank wasn't a rocket ship. It was a beautiful hull with an empty engine, until a giant appeared on the horizon. By 2021, JPMorgan Chase, under the leadership of banking legend Jamie Dimon, had a $1 trillion problem. Legacy banks were losing the war for the next generation. Gen Z didn't walk into physical bank branches. They opened accounts on their smartphones via agile Fintech startups. JPMorgan was desperate for a shortcut to capture millions of young, lifelong customers. And then they saw Frank. When the investment bankers approached Charlie Javice, they had one primary metric that would dictate the entire $175 million acquisition. How many users do you actually have? Javice looked Wall Street's sharpest minds in the eye and delivered a spectacular number. She claimed Frank had 4.25 million users. It was a complete fabrication. In reality, Frank had fewer than 300,000 actual customers. JPMorgan was ready to sign the paperwork, but their due diligence team demanded a routine safety check. They needed to see the raw database of those 4.25 million students to verify the data was real. Charlie Javice was trapped. Admitting the truth meant the deal died, her startup collapsed, and her myth evaporated. Instead, she chose to double down. To secure the deal, federal prosecutors later proved that Javice and her chief growth officer, Olivier Amar, scrambled to manufacture the missing millions. Prosecutors showed that Javice approached an outside data science professor. She paid this specialist $18,000 to write an algorithm designed to generate synthetic data, combining real surnames with fabricated emails and artificial birthdays. The data scientist simply followed technical instructions, entirely unaware that this artificial code was about to be weaponized for a massive financial heist. The result was a colossal spreadsheet. 4 million digital ghosts, perfectly formatted. JPMorgan's highly paid lawyers and compliance officers looked at the file, checked the formatting, and saw exactly what they wanted to see. They never verified if the people behind the emails breathed air. In September 2021, JPMorgan officially acquired Frank for $175 million. Javice walked away with millions in her personal account, a high-paying executive job at the bank, and total victory. It was the ultimate contrast, an $18,000 generated trash file versus a $175 million Wall Street empire. It's January 2022. The honeymoon is over. JPMorgan's marketing department finally decides to utilize their expensive new acquisition. They select a random sample of 400,000 franc users from the database and launch a major test email campaign, offering them premium Chase banking products. They expected a massive wave of new student accounts. Instead, they broke the servers. Instantly, the system started screaming red. Over 70% of the emails bounced back as completely non-existent. Of the remaining messages, the open rate was a catastrophic 1%. The numbers were a statistical impossibility for a live customer base. Legitimate databases don't just decay into thin air overnight. JPMorgan's internal security team immediately launched an emergency forensic audit. The realization was humiliating. The nation's largest bank had been utterly conned by a 29-year-old entrepreneur with a basic data script. CEO Jamie Dimon would later publicly call the acquisition a huge mistake. In December 2022, JPMorgan filed a massive lawsuit against Javice. Her initial response was cold, arrogant defiance. Her defense team claimed the bank was simply suffering from buyer's remorse and was scapegoating a young female founder to cover up their own sloppy due diligence. But the federal government doesn't play by the rules of corporate public relations. The FBI began tracing the digital footprint of the data scientist's spreadsheet. In April 2023, Charlie Javice was arrested by federal agents. The fake it till you make it era was officially going on trial. Spring 2025. Over a grueling 6-week trial in a Manhattan federal court, the prosecution laid out an ironclad paper trail of emails, invoices, and direct testimony from the data scientist. Javice's team tried everything. They argued that JPMorgan was an apex predator that should have performed better background checks. They argued that the fake data was merely a test data set, misunderstood by the bank. But in a court of law, inventing 4 million people to extract $175 million isn't aggressive business. It is a crime. On March 28, 2025, the jury delivered their verdict. They found both Charlie Javice and Olivier Amar guilty on all counts: conspiracy, wire fraud, securities fraud, and bank fraud. On September 29, 2025, U.S. District Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein delivered the final reckoning. In the final days leading up to the sentencing, Javice's legal team made a series of desperate appeals for leniency. In a move that exposed a staggering detachment from reality, they even requested the removal of her court-ordered ankle monitor, arguing that the tracking device would interfere with her new employment as a Pilates instructor in Florida. The judge was completely unmoved by the Pilates defense. He saw right to the core of a cold, calculated multi-million-dollar deception. Judge Hellerstein sentenced the 33-year-old former Forbes star to 85 months, more than 7 years, in federal prison. Furthermore, Javice and Amar were ordered to jointly pay a staggering $287.5 million in restitution, covering the original acquisition price and over $100 million in JPMorgan's compounding legal fees. The fall of Charlie Javice marks the definitive end of an era. For a decade, Silicon Valley told founders to move fast and break things. It rewarded confidence over competence and pitch decks over profits. Javice exploited a system blinded by FOMO, the fear of missing out. She knew that legacy bankers were so terrified of losing tomorrow's customers, they would forget to check the foundations of today. She bet $18,000 on a list of ghosts and almost won $175 million. But in the digital age, data always leaves a footprint. And when the ghosts refused to answer the emails, the entire illusion collapsed. From the cover of Forbes to 85 months in a federal cell,